Chapter 259. After explaining to the little maid for a long time, she finally believed that her kitchen did not attract evil thieves. Unable to find the money, she tore down the stove to vent her anger. Thinking about it, which stupid thief would look for valuable things in the kitchen?
Her private money was all locked in a small box, and even the valuable jewelry bought by the son-in-law was all locked in it, hidden under the small bed in the room.
She carried the key with her every day, so it would not be lost. What was more, First Miss and Second Miss were at home, and no thief could come in. She was afraid that if she just sneaked into the house, before she had time to take a breath, Uncle Fong would break her legs and send her to the yamen. The treasure box was under the bed, so it was very safe. But without the stove, where should she cook today? She would not worry about this later, because the son-in-law said that after the new stove was built, it would not be so difficult to light a fire, and it would not always give out smoke, which made her run out several times to cook. It was said that it could also save firewood. Behind the stove, there was a big bed, which could sleep 4 people. The big bed was connected to the stove, so it was warm at any time every day. When there was nothing to do during the day, they could sit on it to keep warm. Xiaofan imagined the scene of the whole family sleeping on the big bed, and her little face immediately turned red. Ignoring the blushing Xiaofan who was lost in her thoughts, the little girl just liked to let her imagination run wild. Lao Fong and Lao Su had their arms around each other's shoulders and were playing with the mud outside. They did not look like they were at each other's throats just now. Seeing the flattering expression on his face, Li Yi knew that Fong was finished. His weakness was caught, and his status among the brothers would definitely plummet in the future. There might really be a Miss Hong in the Jade Courtyard, and it seemed that she had known Fong for a long time, even before she knew him. In the past, his family was so poor that they could not eat, so it was impossible for them to know each other through prostitution. But every time he mentioned Miss Hong, Fong would blush and stammer. The relationship between them was definitely not as simple as a pure man and a woman. In any case, this was Fong's family business. Although Li Yi was full of curiosity, he did not say it, and he would not break the casserole to ask. Walking out of the yard, they did not go far before they heard the sound of reading from a small yard next to them. It was Qin Qing teaching the children. A yard in the house was specially made as a school. Originally, there were 2 rooms. After removing the middle wall, there was a big classroom, and the small yard outside was the playground. Although there were not many students to begin with, there were only about 20 girls, and it was enough to occupy 1 room. Mr. Qin, who had broken his leg and could only lie on the bed, said that it would be better for the school to be brighter and more comfortable for the children to sit in. Lao Fong and the others did not hesitate to tear down the wall in the middle. As early as in Willow Leaf Village, Mr. Qin was the teacher of the school. Of course, at that time, only children with the surname Liu were qualified to go to school. During the days when Li Yi was the teacher, under the attraction of Sun Wukong, the number of children from poor families gradually increased. Now, the position of teacher was handed over to Qin Qing. It could be seen that she was very diligent and was born to be a teacher. There were more than 20 children in the big house. As long as they were of the right age, she went to visit their homes and let them go to school. This was a good thing. Children were very naughty. In the past, they ran wild in the village, went into the river to catch crabs, climbed trees to dig out bird nests, and never made people feel at ease. Now that they moved here, they did not have to do these things anymore. The prefectural city was full of crooks and honest people. If they did not let them go out to play, the house would be turned upside down. No parent did not have a headache. Little Qin could help them look after their children, so there was no parent who wouldn't be willing. If the naughty child was playful and didn't want to go to school, they would slap him on the butt and ask if he wanted to go. If he didn't want to go, they would slap him again. After a few more slaps, he would be willing. At first, she thought she was looking for someone to look after the child, but a few days later, when the woman was playing with the money, the naughty child proudly pointed at a pile of copper coins and said that she had lost wrongly. 7 copper coins plus 8 copper coins should be 15 copper coins, not 14. The woman was stunned for a moment and gave the naughty child a good beating. 7 plus 8 was 14. She had remembered it clearly since she was young, so how could it be wrong? Counting his fingers and toes again, he realized that he had counted incorrectly. Surprised, she asked the naughty child when he learned to count. The naughty child teared up and said that it was Mr. Qin who taught him. The woman gave the naughty child a few copper coins and told him to buy some good food. Carrying the gift, she went to Qin Qing's house. They had to thank little Qin. Both she and the child's father were boorish people and didn't know a single word. The pile of copper coins at home could only be counted for fun. If they were asked for specific numbers, they would be dumbfounded. But now, their child had only been in school for a few days and already knew how to count. If he knew a few more words, not only would he not have to take the county examination, even if his family met with a disaster in the future, he wouldn't have to starve to death. There had never been a case of a cultured person starving to death. Generations of people couldn't even read a few words. Their great-grandfather generation only knew how to use a saber to kill. Who would have thought that a cultured person would actually appear here? Their ancestral tombs were really emitting green smoke. The families who had sent their children to school all ran to Qin Qing's house. They were not stingy at all with rice and meat. How could they not bring some gifts? Fong carried a stove and went in. The chimney was made of hollow bamboo and tied tightly together. From then on, this new type of stove had successfully been installed in all the families in the house. The honeycomb briquette was also ready. Uncle Han made a mold and pulled over a few carts of coal powder. Soon, the briquettes with holes on them were piled in front of each family's house. When Li Yi walked into Uncle Han's house, the old man was sitting in the yard, busy. It seemed that he was old and couldn't stay idle. Every time he came to Uncle Han's house, he had work to do. Only second uncle was different. Other than sunbathing and eating, there seemed to be nothing else that could interest him. "Young master, what are you making this time?" Hearing footsteps coming from the yard, Uncle Han raised his head and asked with a smile. He had spent his whole life as a carpenter, but he could only make wooden knives and wooden spears for naughty children. He felt a little regretful. He could only make the best use of his skills in Uncle Han's house. Since he had nothing to do, Uncle Han liked to make those strange things that Uncle Han asked him to make. However, Uncle Han was too polite. He gave money every time and often asked Xiaofan to send rice and noodles over. The old man was the only one in the house. The silver biscuits hidden under the water tank in the kitchen could not be used up in this lifetime. Li Yi was actually embarrassed to trouble Uncle Han every time. However, Uncle Han was the only one around who had this skill. Besides, it was not easy for him to live alone. He definitely wouldn't want to give money to the old man for no reason. He could only find something for him to do from time to time. When he gave money, he had to have a legitimate reason. Looking at the old man, he smiled and said, "Just some small things." As he said that, he took out the drawing in his arms. Looking at the small squares on it, Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, you don't have to worry about it. I can make it in 2 days at most. It's not difficult to make these small squares. It's just that my eyes are not good now. I'm afraid that you have to find a young man with good eyesight to carve the words on it. Uncle Han, you just need to get these small squares out." "I'll find someone else to carve the words," Li Yi said with a smile. Ever since he saw that Li Yi could use a sword to carve words on the wall that were the size of a fingernail, and her speed was so fast that Li Yi couldn't even see it clearly with his eyes, Li Yi felt that the job of carving on mahjong would belong to her. Chapter 260. Men from poor families were all good at everything. Raising pigs and horses, farming, building walls, and building houses, there was nothing they couldn't do. Farming was a skill to make a living. If they didn't have money to hire a craftsman to build a house, they had to do it themselves. This was a skill passed down from generation to generation. Those who didn't learn it would have starved or frozen to death. Fong and the others moved very quickly. In just half a day, the stove and Kong that Li Yi wanted had already appeared in the kitchen. After measuring it, the size was exactly the same as his drawing. There was no problem with the principle. The Kong that had just been made couldn't be burned immediately. Otherwise it would crack. This problem wouldn't exist after 2 days of drying. The stove and the Kong were connected. Naturally, they couldn't cook during these 2 days. Li Yi originally planned to solve the problem of eating in a restaurant outside. He didn't expect this idea to be opposed by Xiaofan and Rui. Although his family didn't lack that bit of money, which decent family would go to a restaurant every day to eat? That was something only prodigal sons and prodigals would do. Rui workshop wasn't far from here. The kitchen there didn't lack anything. They had cooked there yesterday. They could just eat in the shop for the next 2 days. Li Yi didn't have any objections. The brothel was just next to Rui workshop. He could discuss things with old man Sun on the way. Fong had already brought a few people to smash his own stove. He didn't even consider the problem of where they were going to eat today.
The stove in the son-in-law's house had been smashed.
How could his house not be smashed? Those who didn't smash would be fools.
Who didn't understand that if they followed in the footsteps of the son-in-law, they would have food to eat and money to earn.
They had been living like this for the past few days.
Otherwise, they would still be living in the village on the mountain. When Li Yi and his family were preparing to go to Rui workshop, Mrs. Feng was pointing at Feng's nose and scolding.
"You're such a glutton. The stove at home is broken. Where are you going to cook today?"
Feng's mother-in-law was full of anger. She washed the vegetables and was about to cook, but this guy ran in and smashed the stove.
She was almost scared to death. The mother and son in the family relied on this man to survive. If he was crazy or hysterical, she and Juzi would not be able to live.
What's wrong with eating at the intoxicated fragrance restaurant for a couple of days? It's not like our family lacks this bit of money.
Feng retorted.
It would have been better if he didn't say it, but the moment he did, Mrs. Feng got even angrier.
Do you feel uneasy with so much money at home, so you're thinking of ways to give it away?
This morning, you wanted to buy a performer, and now you want to go to drunken fragrance restaurant for a meal.
You'll have to spend a few taels to eat there. Why don't you take a look at the kind of people who eat there?
Sooner or later, the family savings will be used up by you,
Feng retorted again.
When Li Yi walked to the door of the house, he saw a broom flying out from the yard of Feng's house.
Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover.
One was an iron man who wouldn't frown even if a knife cut his body, and the other was a seemingly virtuous and dignified peasant woman. Suddenly, the dignified and virtuous woman turned into a female tyrannosaurus, and the indomitable man turned into a good-for-nothing.
What a sin! Once again, he sighed at his luck.
Although when they first met, Rui smashed the solid wooden table in front of him, and he didn't know how much fiercer she was than Mrs. Feng, but for the rest of the time, she was a good housekeeper, a gentle and virtuous ideal wife. Although there was still a veil between them, it was still better than. Thinking of Feng's wailing under the broom, he quickly threw that possibility out of his mind.
It was still early, and there was just a touch of white in the east. There were always reasons to get up late in winter. Most people were still sleeping in their warm beds and were unwilling to get up. There were not many people in the tiled houses. Who would come here to watch a show in the early morning? The open brothels were empty, and the doors of the wine shops and tea houses were closed. Only a figure occasionally walked out of the brothels.
His footsteps were weak, and he was still thinking about how good the girl's kung fu was last night. In one of the brothels, Sun Yun, who had just turned 15, got up very early. He put the rag in the warm water and quickly wiped the tables and chairs. He needed to wipe the tables and chairs clean before the brothels opened. There couldn't be any dirt on them. Then he boiled the hot water so that he could prepare tea for the customers at any time. He was only wrapped in a thin jacket, but his forehead was covered with fine sweat. The young man's body was not afraid of the cold. After working for an hour, he only felt that his body was steaming hot, and he didn't feel cold at all.
He didn't do this work for free.
Sister Ruoqing said that if he could get up so early every day and finish wiping the tables and boiling the hot water, she would give him 10 copper coins.
She would pay him once a day.
Thinking about the dozens of copper coins lying in the small money bag that he secretly hid, he thought that one day he would be able to save enough money to marry a wife.
He wouldn't need his old grandfather to worry about him anymore. His heart was full of energy, and the frequency of his hands also increased. He didn't even notice that his grandfather had walked behind him. Old Sun walked over and looked at him lovingly. He said, "Xiao Yun, rest for a while. There are still 2 hours before the brothels open." Sun Yun turned his head and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He grinned, revealing his white teeth.
He said, "Grandpa, I'm not tired.
I'm almost done. I still have to boil the water later." Then he continued with the work at hand. There were only 2 sets of tables and chairs to be wiped. He could rest for a while when he boiled the water later. Looking at the child's quick movements, Old Sun's old face showed a gratified expression. A diligent child wouldn't starve to death. Even if he were to lie in a coffin one day, Xiao Yun could live on alone. Of course, before he found a wife for his child and settled his marriage, he wouldn't be willing to close his eyes. If he could live to the day he held a great-grandson, he would die with a smile on his face. Looking at the empty brothel, Old Sun's face showed a trace of a smile. It didn't matter that there was no one now.
He knew that it wouldn't be long before this place would be full of customers. The painted skin could still be performed for a period of time. When the number of customers gradually decreased, the number of performances of the painted skin would be reduced, and Ying Ning and A Chinese Ghost Story could officially appear on the stage. With Li around, there would be no shortage of such good stories, and of course, the customers' tips would not be less. As a wandering actor, when did the future become so worth looking forward to? When a person was immersed in beautiful things for too long, he couldn't help but think of some sad things. Yesterday, a brothel outside the city collapsed, and an old friend of many years was crushed under it. Although he wasn't seriously injured, his old bones were probably lying in bed for at least 10 days to half a month before he could get out of bed. He could be considered to have made a name for himself, but there were still countless actors who found it very difficult to live. In the past 2 days, countless old friends had come to him, hoping to make a living here. However, the number of people here was indeed saturated, so Old Sun could only helplessly shake his head and refuse. He had been wandering around for a lifetime, so he could understand the situation of most actors the best. If there was anything he could help them with, he would not hesitate to help. However, he was small and weak. In the big environment, he couldn't change anything at all. Early in the morning, there was not a single customer in the brothel. Only Old Sun was sitting in the corner in a daze. Li Yi walked over. Old Sun heard the footsteps, raised his head, and hurriedly stood up. Li Yi waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. He asked with a smile, "How was business yesterday?" Old Sun smiled and said, "Very good. The reward I received is a little more than the day before yesterday. I haven't had time to send it to you." Of course, after recognizing the particularity of the brothel, Li Yi didn't intend to give up the opportunity to control the invisible power in his hands. This world was too unsafe. If he didn't have enough power in his hands, he could be crushed like an ant at any time. In the past few months, the peaceful life in Willow Leaf Village was gone forever. There had been earth-shaking changes. He always felt a little guilty if he still lived as carelessly as before. "Child! What did you just say?" The old man thought that he had heard it wrong, and even his voice was a little trembling. Before Li Yi spoke, he asked again, "Are you willing to accept those poor people who wander around and give them food?" The old man's voice was still a little trembling, for fear that he had misunderstood. Whether those wandering performers could fill their stomachs depended entirely on luck. If they met a generous customer, they wouldn't have to starve for a long time. If the customer only watched the performance and didn't give money, they would have to tighten their belts for the next few days. When did people from Lu Qi get a fixed salary? Li Yi was a little puzzled as to why the old man had suddenly become so agitated. Since the stage play Painted Skin had such good ratings, when Journey to the West and Legend of the White Snake came out, who knew how shocked these country bumpkins who had never seen the world would be? This was a business that would not lose money at all. It was too ridiculous to rely on other people's money to eat. Some people didn't even need to pay a penny to watch a performance. After watching, they left. No one thought that this method was unreasonable. Each person had one ticket, and they could sit according to the number. It was so simple and convenient. If he wanted to completely change this industry, he couldn't do it overnight. He temporarily suppressed these thoughts and looked at the old man who was staring at him with excited eyes. He said, "What do you think about giving them 500 cents a month?" "That's too much, too much." Old man's son was so excited that his beard trembled. In this industry, it was already a blessing from the heavens to be able to eat their fill. Most people didn't even dare to dream of receiving 500 cents a month. If they didn't do this kind of good thing, they would be kicked in the head by a donkey. You can discuss this with Miss Wan first. You can first call some people to try it out. It's not certain whether it will succeed or not. Remember to choose people who know everything. For now, don't send money over. You guys use my share first. If it's not enough, then we'll talk about it. Old man's son patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this matter to me. I will definitely do it properly for you." Old man's son's face turned red. This was a good thing for the many performers in Qing and Prefecture. He was very happy that these people in the same industry could have a meal. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the stage covered by the curtain. There was a look of anticipation in his eyes. This world's first entertainment company was about to take its first step. Chapter 261.
The dozen people here are our original team. You have been with them for a long time. If some of them are smart, you can ask them to be responsible for the newly built venues outside. Of course, it doesn't matter if they are not smart. As long as they are down to earth and willing to work, they can learn these things slowly. Li Yi pinched a piece of osmanthus cake, put it in his mouth, and told his plan to Wan Ruoqing. It's not a solution to live on rewards all the time. In a few days, number the chairs. When they watch the performance in the future, one person will have one ticket, and they will sit according to the number. You can decide the ticket price. The higher the seats are, the more expensive it will be. When all the seats are sold out, start to sell the standing tickets, and the price can be lower. Wan Ruoqing listened carefully and remembered every word he said in her heart. Since ancient times, actors' income had mostly depended on others' rewards. The method of buying tickets before watching the performance had never been heard of. But this was not important. What was important was that this sentence came from his mouth, so it must not be wrong. This method is not necessarily suitable. In short, change it slowly. You know the things here better than I do. You can make your own decisions. Unconsciously, the last piece of osmanthus cake had been eaten. Li Yi stood up, clapped his hands and said. Wan Ruoqing also stood up, bowed to him seriously, and said, if this method is feasible, I don't know how many people can avoid being homeless. I thank you on behalf of those actors. The matter of recruiting actors will be handed over to you and Mr. Sunday. Li Yi made an obeisance and said. The reason why he did this was that he also wanted to change the current situation of this industry and let those actors live a better life, but it was more because of his own selfishness. But in any case, a win-win result was always good. He was used to being a hands-off boss. After handing this matter to Wan Ruoqing, he didn't intend to take care of it anymore. She was also an actor, so she was the most suitable candidate for this matter. When he walked out of the brothel and passed by Rui Square, suddenly a figure rushed out from the side and grabbed his arm. Lord Commandant, you're finally here. Li Yi was startled, thinking that it was someone from the Green Forest who had come to seek revenge. Just as he was about to struggle free, he heard the figure's surprised and delighted voice. From the looks of it, Xiao Chen was not here to seek revenge. Xiao Chen took a closer look and asked doubtfully, Physician Chen, what are you doing? The person in front of him was Physician Chen of Huichun Hall. After not seeing him for a long time, the old man who was previously quite spirited had actually become much more haggard. It was unknown what had happened during this period of time. He invited him into the Rui workshop and poured him a cup of green tea. After taking a sip, Dr. Chen sighed and said with a bitter tone, County Lieutenant, you really made me look for you for a long time. Why is Dr. Chen looking for me? Li Yi looked at him in confusion. Did I owe him money? Looking at him, it seemed that he owed him a lot. Impossible. I don't remember when I borrowed money from him. Looking at the county lieutenant's confused face, the expression on Dr. Chen's face could no longer be described in words. Since the last time he saw the county lieutenant suture the wound with a needle and thread, Dr. Chen knew that this was another great achievement. He solemnly asked him to spread this method. At that time, the county lieutenant also readily agreed, but after that day, there was no news. Although he personally saw the county lieutenant's rescue that day, he went to see the patient. The suture was obviously not an ordinary thread, and there seemed to be some details before the suture. He still had a lot of doubts in these aspects. It was a matter of great importance, so it was impossible for him to hastily present this method. As a doctor, Dr. Chen certainly knew the importance of this method. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, many lives would be saved. In the days when he was waiting for the county lieutenant to teach this method, he didn't know the taste of food and couldn't sleep at night. If he could also leave a small mark on this great merit, what kind of honor would it be? However, after waiting for a few days, he didn't see the county lieutenant again. Dr. Chen couldn't sit still and went to the county government office to look for him several times. But he only got the answer that the county lieutenant was not in. He went to the Rui workshop to look for him, but the door of the shop was closed, and there was a big lock hanging outside. He stayed outside for several days, but no one came. One night, he finally saw the light in the shop, but before he got close, he was put on the neck by several knives at the same time. He was almost scared to death in the middle of the night. If he didn't explain his identity to those people, his head would have been cut off. Thinking of his experience these days, and then looking at the county lieutenant's confused expression at this time,
It was obvious that he had forgotten about that matter. Dr. Chen almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Forcibly suppressing his old blood pressure, Dr. Chen stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi, saying, "I beg you, Your Excellency, to spread the method of suturing wounds to the world. Countless people and soldiers will remember the county lieutenant's great kindness." After Dr. Chen spoke, Li Yi remembered this matter. At that time, he seemed to have said that he would teach him the method of suturing wounds, but he didn't. Chapter 262. Dr. Chen held the piece of paper and left as if he had found a treasure. Before he left, he told Li Yi that when he got back, he had to make a copy of what was written on it and personally hand it over to Sir Liu of the Imperial Physicians' Bureau. As for the original manuscript, which was this piece of paper, he had to keep it at home and pray to it every day so that it could be passed down to future generations. It seemed that for the ancient people, money was not the most important thing. Even when they did not have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and food to eat, they still valued reputation and honor more than anything else. Scholars sharpened their brains to enter the court and become an official. Which one of them did not have ambitions to fulfill, to make a career, and to leave their name in the annals of history? Perhaps later on, they only thought about making money and wielding power, but that was a trend in a bad situation. One could not deny their original intentions. Dr. Chen put down his pride and asked him for advice on suturing wounds. He even traveled thousands of miles from Qing and Prefecture to the capital to personally hand this thing over to the hands of the imperial physician, Lu Jimin, so that all the doctors in the world could learn it. All this was just to leave a small mark in the annals of history. If someone in the future, when suturing a wound, had a 1 in a million chance of thinking of the name Chen Mufeng, he would probably laugh out loud in his coffin. His obsession was so deep that if Li Yi had said no at that time, Dr. Chen would probably have knocked his head on Li Yi's body to prove his sincerity. As he walked out of Rui's workshop, he sighed. Leaving a name in the annals of history was far more practical than a few hundred or 1,000 taels of silver. In the future, if he had a cold or diarrhea, he would not go to other medicine shops, but to Huichun Hall. Whatever he could get back was better. Li Yi held a sword in his hand and waved it in the courtyard. Every day, he would take out 2 hours to practice martial arts in the courtyard. This had become his daily routine. The sword in his hand was Lu Rui's treasure. After much coaxing and pestering, he finally managed to borrow it from her. He also used 10 pieces of osmanthus cakes as a condition for her to teach him a set of swordsmanship. The osmanthus cake was given to him by Wan Ruoqing. He liked doing business without any cost the most. In 2 days, he had almost mastered the basic sword art taught by Lu Rui. When he was fighting with Mississippi Lu, who only used a branch and did not use any true chi, his sword was knocked away after only 2 moves, and the branch was on his neck. The evaluation he received was that he only knew inflexible moves and did not know how to be flexible. Even if he learned a powerful sword art, it would be useless. Li Yi was also helpless about this. He didn't have much experience in fighting, and only Mississippi Lu was willing to spar with him. How much flexibility could he possibly have? He also knew where his shortcomings were. When it came to practicing martial arts, not everyone could dominate the world after learning a powerful martial art. Without enough accumulation of experience, it was like owning a treasure for nothing. The only thing missing was the key to open the door. It would be a waste not to use the free sparring partner. If he fought with Mississippi Lu more, he would become more and more powerful. Uncle Han walked over with a cloth bag in his hand and put it on the stone table. There was a rustling sound coming from the cloth bag. Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, the small wooden blocks are all done." "Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Han." Li Yi opened the cloth bag and saw piles of small wooden blocks inside. They already had the shape of mahjong, and the size was similar to the size of the mahjong in the future. The edges and corners were also polished very smooth, so it would not hurt his hand. He counted the number, and there were exactly 150 pieces. There were 136 pieces in a set of mahjong. In case one piece was broken, there was a spare. Now that he had the wooden blocks, he would leave the rest to Mississippi Lu. Looking at Lu Rui, who was practicing swordsmanship not far away, Li Yi carried the cloth bag and walked over. She was practicing the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Recently, she seemed to have hit a bottleneck. She often raised her sword and slashed randomly. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi did not dare to talk to her. "Rui, how about we discuss something?" Seeing Li Yi walking over, Lu Rui put away the sword in his hand. He glanced at her and said impatiently, What? Her tone was a little irritated. These days, her learning of the Tai Chi swordsmanship was smooth. 2 days ago, she finally hit a bottleneck. Her progress was slow, as if she was stuck in a quagmire. Help me carve something on these wooden blocks, and I will teach you the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Li Yi looked at her and said temptingly. Negotiation was also an art. First of all, one had to know what the other party needed. Then, they would be able to achieve miraculous results. Because of this matter, Mississippi Lu was like having her period for the second time in a month. Her temper was bad, and even Xiaofan was avoiding her. She could not resist the temptation and could only be a free labor in exchange for what she needed. You know the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship? Anger flashed across Lu Rui's face. She glared at him. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because she had hit a bottleneck. She was thinking about how to break through even when she was eating and sleeping. Suddenly, someone told her that she knew the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Her first thought was not happiness, but anger. This was Mississippi Lu's logic. Seeing that Mississippi Lu's gaze was starting to turn hostile, Li Yi was a little puzzled. The story should not have developed like this. Shouldn't she agree to his request and carve mahjong in exchange for the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that he talked nonsense about? Why was she looking at him like that? Wait, why did she raise her sword? What do you want? Wait, let's talk. Put down your sword first. Don't do it. Help. After a while, Li Yi was forced to a corner by Lu Rui. Mississippi Lu probably did not know that her current position was called leaning against the wall in the future. She only looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. Li Yi felt that he was too naive just now. Women were unreasonable creatures. If this woman was called Lu Rui, then she could not be judged by common sense. The idea of using the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that even he did not know whether it was real or fake had been proven to be impossible. Looking at Mississippi Lu's expression, she was ready to force herself on him. There was no rice at home, so Rui took Xiaofan out to buy some. Uncle Han closed the door when he went out. There were only the two of them at home. Even if they screamed their throats out, no one would come to save them. For Taiji, the sword moves aren't important. Only by memorizing the constantly revolving sword intent and forgetting the order of the moves can one obtain its essence. When facing an enemy, one must control the sword with his will, allowing it to be ever-changing and have endless moves. Only by mastering it thoroughly can one be able to use it as one pleases. A man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Facing Mississippi Lu's robbing behavior, Li Yi decided to compromise for now. Although he did not really understand what the sentence meant, when Zhang Sanfeng taught Zhang Wuji swordsmanship on Wudong Mountain, he made him forget the moves. Perhaps this was what it meant. It should be able to scare Mississippi Lu, right? After interacting with Rui for so long, Li Yi already knew that the more mysterious something was, the more it could scare her. As for whether or not she could learn anything from it, it would depend on her own comprehension. Sure enough, after hearing this sentence, Mississippi Lu finally let go of him. A familiar blank expression appeared on her pretty face. Li Yi let out a sigh of relief. When it came to tricking people, ordinary people could not be compared to those Taoist priests and monks. Priest Zhang was really a god, and he could not catch up to him. Chapter 263. Just when Li Yi gave up on the idea of hiring Mississippi Lu for free and planned to do it himself, Lu Rui walked over with her sword in her arms. Tell me, what did you want from me? She looked at Li Yi with her sword in her arms. The feeling of a storm just now disappeared without a trace, and she felt a sense of lightness. Nothing much. I just want you to help me carve something on this. Li Yi pointed at the pile of small wooden blocks and said. A moment later, the long sword in Rui's hand was replaced by a sharp little dagger. Her movements were so fast that Li Yi couldn't see it clearly. Rings or long strips quickly appeared on the small blocks. After they were carved, she threw them to Li Yi. Li Yi couldn't believe it. Mississippi Lu had changed so much before and after. Did her period leave for the second time this month in such a short time? Or did she really understand the essence of Tai Chi sword from those words and successfully break through the realm? After careful observation, he found that there seemed to be some small changes in her body. In the past, she was like a sharp sword that could scare people to death with just a glance. Now, that kind of temperament had weakened a lot, and there was an additional indescribable feeling. This feeling was more or less similar to the feeling that Rui gave him. Li Yi sighed in his heart,
feeling quite hurt. What kind of person was this? He just randomly made a few sentences, and she actually understood the essence of martial arts. Wasn't what she said just now nonsense in Wuxia novels? Could it be that old Master Jin, the master of Wuxia novels, was actually a peerless master who returned to the natural state? He probably wouldn't have the chance to verify the truth of this matter in this lifetime. He picked up the small wooden block that Lu Rui threw over and painted the patterns on it. The ink quickly seeped in, and he put it under the sun to dry it in a short while. Winter really wasn't a good season. It was annoying to always be under the sun. Occasionally, he could sit on the Kong and play mahjong to change his mood. There were 4 people in the house, just enough for a table. In a few days, he would also make the poker cards. When Rui and Xiaofan cooked, the 3 of them could also play do di zhu. Thinking about it, it wasn't a bad idea. Old son, you're such a busy man. How come you have time to visit me today? In a dilapidated thatched cottage outside the prefecture city, an old man who was lying on a bed looked at the old man's surnamed son as he walked in and said with a smile. I came to see if you're dead or not, old son said without hesitation. Don't worry. I have to see if you're dead before I can close my eyes. They were old friends who often joked about such things. The old man lying on the bed with a somewhat dispirited complexion did not get angry. Instead, he retorted sarcastically. Old man's son placed a pile of things in a corner. Immediately, a young man came over with a porcelain bowl and respectfully said, Grandpa's son, drink some water. You've accepted a good disciple. Old man's son rubbed the young man's head and said with a smile. Knowing that his master and grandpa's son had something to say, the young man put down the bowl and left. Speaking of the young man in front of him, the old man lying on the bed relaxed his eyebrows. The old man on the bed looked at old man's son and said, Let's get straight to the point. I don't have many years left to live. I heard that your farm has a steady stream of customers these days, and you've turned a dead farm into a farm. I admire your ability, and I've never asked you for anything in my life. I just hope that after I die, you can give this child something to eat. The child is still young, and he can't live alone. As long as he doesn't starve to death, you can do whatever you want with him. No, that won't do. Old son shook his head before he finished listening. A trace of anger appeared on the old man's face and he said, Old son, this child's talent is not bad. If you train him for a few years, he will be able to earn money for you. We've known each other for a lifetime, and you're not even willing to help me with this? Old son shook his head and said, Don't be in such a hurry to die. You should teach your disciple yourself. When I came here, I already sent little Yun to find a doctor. When the time comes, I'll ask the doctor to write a prescription and have your disciple boil it for you twice a day. I reckon that he will recover very quickly. When the time comes, I still need your help. This old man has so much talent, it would be a pity if he died. The old man on the bed listened with a blank face. Old son said a lot, but he became more and more confused. If you have something to say, just say it. Stop your storytelling. The old man's muddy eyes stared at old son and said. Old son patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Good thing, very good thing. The youth squatting outside the door used a wooden stick to tease the ants on the ground. There were not many ants in winter. Maybe it was because the weather was good today, but there were a few ants moving around under the eaves. The youth kept drawing circles with the wooden stick and watched the ants move back and forth in the circle. From time to time, he would look back into the house. He didn't know what Grandpa's son and master were talking about. Every once in a while, there would be a few sounds of laughter. Grandpa's son seemed to be very happy, and Grandpa was also very happy. Why didn't little Yun come with Grandpa's son today? She even said that she would go to the mountains with him to set a trap to catch rabbits in a few days. As the young man thought about this, he raised his head and saw a young man who looked about the same age as him walking over with another figure. 80,000. While Old Man's son was not around, he and Ruoqing spent a long time talking about recruiting performers and expanding their business. A medium-sized brothel had been rebuilt outside the city. According to Li Yi, it was more appropriate to call it a theater. Building such a thing was different from building a house. It was the same as building a shack. The place that had been built in a few days was sturdy, far better than other crudely built brothels. It would definitely not collapse under the weight of heavy snow again. As for actors, since this model was still in the experimental stage,
They had only recruited 20 of them for the time being. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing had discussed it and decided that a medium-sized theater should have 20 actors. It would not only satisfy the performance requirements, but it would also be easier to manage. Living at the bottom of society, it was common for them to not have enough to eat. No one could refuse a fixed monthly salary of 500 copper coins. At first, those performers thought that Oldman's son was lying to them. After a short moment of shock, they seemed to be afraid that Oldman's son would change his mind, so they immediately pressed their fingerprints on the contract. In addition to the salary, the content of the contract also required them not to spread what they learned here. Everyone understood this. For people like them, this was something to eat. If others learned it, they would be the ones starving to death. No one dared to violate the contract. Even if this was brought to the government, it would count. It was definitely a place that they could not afford to offend. Stage plays were still very unfamiliar to those newly recruited performers. After listening to Li Yi's suggestion, Oldman's son and the others pondered for a long time before they came up with it. These people had no experience, so they still needed to go through some training before they could officially take up the job. Although the painted skin was still popular, it was obviously not as popular as before. The next one to be put on the big stage would be a Chinese ghost story. Unlike the former, which relied on horror to attract people, stories like romance and the female ghost scholar would probably be more attractive to men in this era. This was especially true for scholars. Every single one of them had fantasized about various romantic affairs, such as spending the spring night with a fox immortal or a beautiful female ghost. 80% of the supernatural novels on the market had such a plot, and it was still the mainstream of the market. It was a group of ancient losers who liked to fantasize. If their fantasies were fulfilled, they would not be afraid of not generously. All right, I still have to find time to copy a few more stories. Why don't I take out the complete Liao Zhai novel and make it into a series? Li Yi lay comfortably in the huge bathtub. Actually, the ancient people also knew how to enjoy themselves. If the bathtub was covered with a lid, could it be called a sauna? In the middle of winter, there was nothing more comfortable than soaking in a warm room with a hot bath. If there was, then there would be a pair of soft hands constantly massaging your shoulders while you were soaking in the bath. The tiredness of the day would be dispelled. Xiaofan's massage skills were becoming more and more skillful. Li Yi secretly condemned this kind of luxurious and decadent life in his heart. He was incomparably disgusted with feudal hedonism. He opened his eyes and glanced at the door through the mist. Xiaofan had gone out to get hot water. Why wasn't she back yet? Creak. The door was pushed open, and he could vaguely see a figure carrying a bucket of water in. Li Yi closed his eyes in satisfaction. Footsteps came from behind him. Warm water was poured into the bathtub. Just as the servant girl was about to leave, Li Yi called out to her without opening his eyes. Wait a moment, help massage the young master's shoulders again. The footsteps paused, and a moment later, a pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. He felt that Xiaofan's skills this time had improved quite a bit. He remembered that when he was shopping previously, the servant girl stared at a bracelet in Golden Jade Lane for a long time. He would buy it for her tomorrow. As he massaged, Li Yi began to feel strange. No matter how fast the servant girl's skills in massaging the shoulders improved, it was impossible for her to reach Rui's level in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, the familiar chatter by his ear was gone, and there was no longer any pleading for him to continue telling her the story that she had not finished. Just when he was about to turn his head to take a look, a familiar voice sounded. Husband, the water seems to be a little cold. Do you want to add some hot water? This was Rui's voice. Chapter 265. Ordering Rui around was not as easy as ordering Xiaofan around. He did not add more hot water, nor did he let Rui continue to massage his shoulders. After she went out, he came out of the bathtub, dried his body, lay on the bed with his arms as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Before going to bed, he would habitually think about some things. Even the memory fragments hidden in the depths of his mind in his previous life were found in a corner, carefully savoring, and never tired of it. One by one, the happy, sad, or angry things were like fleeting clouds. Although it had only been a few months, it seemed to have crossed thousands of years. Those things, whether happy or sad, did not cause much ripples in his heart. He just tried his best not to think of those familiar faces. Every time this happened, an emotion called yearning would spread like crazy. Those people or things, He was destined to be unable to give up in this life. If there was a chance to go back, no matter how difficult it was, he would not have any hesitation, even if it was just a glance, and then look at that familiar world. Pa! A crisp sound rang in the room, but Li Yi, who was in a state of absent-mindedness, did not notice it. Today was the 15th, and the moon outside was very round. This day of every month was the most difficult time for Li Yi, especially when he was alone. There was no sound around, and a feeling of loneliness escaped from the depths of his soul. However, even in a state of absent-mindedness, the feeling of dizziness could still be felt, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. The feeling of nausea also gradually became clearer. Naturally, it was impossible for him to feel dizzy and nauseous because of homesickness. When he realized that the situation was not quite right, he immediately recovered his mind and sat up from the bed. At this time, the room was filled with a strange smell. Li Yi was very familiar with this smell, the smell of coal smoke that he often smelled when he was a child. Not knowing when, the chimney made of bamboo on the honeycomb briquette stove actually cracked. The symptoms that he felt just now were obviously mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney made of bamboo couldn't completely expel the smoke, so people who had a stove would usually choose to extinguish the stove at night. After taking a bath just now, he forgot to do so. Fortunately, he didn't fall asleep. Otherwise, Ru Yi and the others would have to wait to collect his corpse tomorrow morning. With a lingering fear in his heart, he moved the stove outside and opened the door and windows to the fullest. He sat alone on the porch and looked at the moon. She did not know when the carbon monoxide in the room would run out. The moon tonight was big and round. It was said that the moon on the 15th of the lunar month was round on the 16th of the lunar month, but the round in the word circumference was not the round in the word reunion. Wearing an unlined garment, it was quite cold sitting on the porch. However, Li Yi did not want to move now, so he did not go back to the room to get his clothes. He just leaned against a pillar and looked up at the sky. He did not know whether the moon in the two worlds was the same, at least on the surface there was no difference. There was a large dark spot alternating between light and dark. Now, the common saying was that the moonlight was blocked by the osmanthus tree in the moon palace, and almost everyone thought so. Every time this happened, he would involuntarily have a feeling of loneliness as a master. A group of ignorant people. It was just a plane on the moon. There was no osmanthus tree. Last time, when Li Xian was drunk, he said he wanted to go to the moon to see Chang'e. With the current conditions, he could not think about going to the moon, which was even more difficult than reaching the sky. A figure had been leaning against the door for a long time, watching Li Yi's expression alternating between joy and sadness. His eyes had never left the moon in the sky, and he was holding a garment in his hand, but he never walked over. Achoo! He sneezed and almost snot came out of his nose. When he was about to get up and go to the room to get his clothes, he felt a weight on his shoulder, and a coat immediately appeared on his body. Husband, are you admiring the moon alone? Lu Rui sat down beside Li Yi, also staring at the moon in the sky. I'm thinking, when can I go to the moon to have a look? Li Yi seemed to murmur unconsciously. Ah! There was a little surprise in Rui's voice. She looked back at him, blinking her eyes. She had always been steady, but at this moment, she actually looked like a little girl. She reached out and touched Li Yi's forehead. After finding that he did not have a fever, she became even more confused. The Moon Palace was the place where immortals lived. How could mortals go up there? Since ancient times, countless people had thought about it, but no one had done it. Although the moon always hung there quietly, there was no door. Only immortals could go up there. Don't be surprised. In theory, this is very feasible. Li Yi took her hand away from his forehead and found that it was very cold. He held it with both hands and said, maybe thousands of years later, someone will really do it. However, if an ordinary person goes up there, they will definitely die. It's hot in the day and cold at night. There are holes made by big stones everywhere. It's not a place for people to stay at all. If they don't die from the cold or the heat, it will be fun. If they don't die from the cold or heat, then it'll be fun. Everyone there is an expert in Qigong. Chapter 266. Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's words, Li Yi's first thought was that it was her trick again. Last time, she closed the door and asked him to take off his clothes, but he didn't expect it to be for healing. This time, it must not be what he thought at first. Although he had the soul of thousands of years later and was much more open-minded than the ancient people, in fact, he was still very thin-skinned on some things. After all, he was just a young man without any experience in love in his previous life. It was too difficult to expect him to be an expert in flirting with girls, especially beautiful girls in ancient times. He walked into Rui's room generously. He would sleep here for the night. Rui, Xiaofan, or Rui could make do for one night. In the future, he would have to put out the stove early at night, and Fong would have to warn him. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost incurable in ancient times. Even if he could be cured after a long time, there would be serious sequelae. He would either be paralyzed or stupid, and he needed to be vigilant at all times. There was a faint fragrance on the sheets and quilt, which Li Yi would never forget in his life. When he first came to Willow Leaf Village, he woke up in this fragrance. It was not perfume, but the natural body fragrance of a woman. Rui carried a quilt from the next room and closed the door. Under Li Yi's puzzled gaze, she walked to the bed and said, "Husband, can you move a little deeper?" Carbon monoxide poisoning and Fong were all forgotten by Li Yi at the moment. If she liked to inhale, she could inhale. She had a good body, so inhaling some carbon monoxide was nothing. Hugging the quilt with a faint fragrance, he shrank to the foot of the bed. Watching Rui crawling into the quilt and lying next to him, Li Yi was still in a daze. It turned out that he was right this time. Xiaohuan and Rui are asleep, and I don't want to disturb them. She turned to look at Li Yi and explained, "It's getting late. Husband, you should rest early." If Li Yi had not fallen into a state of shock, he would have been able to hear the slight tremble in her voice. Unfortunately, he was still unable to get over the soft flesh on his arm. He pinched it hard and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The pain meant that he wasn't dreaming, nor was it a hallucination caused by inhaling too much carbon monoxide. In the middle of the room, the flame of the oil lamp on the table was still flickering. Rui flicked her finger, and a strong wind swept across, plunging the room into darkness. Although he was only covered with a blanket, Li Yi did not feel cold at all. Instead, his body felt warm from the inside out. His nose was filled with a familiar fragrance. He had always been used to sleeping alone. Now that there was another person by his side, the sleepiness that had just arisen was instantly gone. However, none of this was important. The breathing beside him quickly calmed down, and Lu Rui let out a long sigh of relief. She tilted her head slightly to take a look, and an imperceptible smile appeared on her pretty face. She slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi had another dream at night. This time, there were no messy things in the dream. Naturally, he didn't have to wash his underwear secretly in the morning. In the dream, he was in his home in the 21st century, sitting on the sofa and watching TV. Rui, who was wearing a white dress, was busy in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Li Yi got up and opened the door. When he opened the door, a long sword was on his neck. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who was dressed up and glaring at him. At the end of the dream, he was still being chased by Mississippi Lu with a sword. Li Yi didn't understand why Rui always liked to run into his dream. This time, the reason for the chase was that he kidnapped her sister. Early in the morning, he got up from the bed. Although there was no one beside him, the fragrance was still there, which meant that everything last night was not a dream. Last night, he had crossed a huge chasm. There was a relaxed smile on the corner of his mouth. The carbon poison was really too annoying. Li Yi felt that his previous room couldn't be used anymore. Coincidentally, there was not enough space in the storage room at home. From now on, he would use it as a storage room. As for the original storage room, it was not bad to modify it into a study. Xiao Huan walked out of Li Yi's room with a copper basin in her hand. She looked puzzled. When she was about to ask Miss where the son-in-law went early in the morning, she walked to the door of Mrs. room and looked inside. The copper basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 267. I'm sorry I won. Rui played a tile. Li Yi smiled and pushed down his tile wall. Rui jumped off the heated bed in annoyance. She glared at the two and said, "You two are in cahoots. I'm not playing anymore." Ever since Rui became Li Yi's mistress, Li Yi's luck came back. He kept gesturing secretly and Rui always understood his meaning. Thus, Mississippi Lu became the only one who lost money in the family. Although winning money was not the main point in the end. At most, she used a few copper coins to deal with it. However, there were wins and losses in playing mahjong. It was not a good thing to always lose. Mississippi Lou was obviously angry. She was probably going to take her sword to the courtyard to chop the air. If there was a god of mahjong, Xiaofan must be her biological daughter. It was just that recently, she was obviously absent-minded. She was not focused when playing mahjong. No one knew what she was thinking. The next day, Li Yi changed his room into a storage room. The reason was that the room that had been ravaged by carbon poison could not be lived in. He began to live together with Xiao Huan with a peace of mind. Although he had to choose between being a beast and being worse than a beast, he had no choice but to choose the latter. But compared to the past, this was already a groundbreaking event. The reason why Xiao Huan was a little unhappy might be that she could no longer hug Rui to sleep. She had to sleep on the heated bed in the kitchen for a long time. But it did not matter. When spring came, he would build her another room. It was not a good idea for a girl to always sleep in the kitchen. Of course, the position that should have belonged to her was occupied by him. The little servant girl felt wronged first. He would slowly make it up to her later. He took Xiao Huan to buy the hairpin that she had liked for a long time. She would no longer have a depressed expression on her face. The two people walking in front were chatting. They were talking about the new play in the Chongping Street Theater. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. The former brothel was no longer called a brothel. It was called a theater. Although most people were not used to it, the name was not the point. The point was that the plays performed in it were more novel and special. It was not comparable to any straw shed in the courtyard. He hoped that this A Chinese Ghost Story would be better than the previous Painted Skin. Of course, special places always had special rules. It was said that the theater was different from ordinary brothels. Not everyone could enter just because they wanted to. They had to buy a so-called ticket at the door. Although it was called a ticket, it was actually a small wooden plaque. On it was written the plays that could be watched with a wooden plaque, as well as the amount of time that could be spent inside. When they left, they had to return the wooden plaque. Chapter 268. The theater worker banged a gong, indicating that the performance was about to begin. At this time, the theater was almost full. In the past, there had only been a few square tables in the brothel for people to sit around casually. Now, it had been changed to chairs connected together. A small platform protruded from one side of the chairs for tea and food. Of course, only the first 2 rows had this kind of treatment. They had to let those people know where the extra copper coins they spent went. Xiao Huan wanted to see A Chinese Ghost Story, but she didn't make it. She could only watch the Painted Skin again. Since she had nothing to do, she might as well wait with her. When the curtains were pulled back, a few more figures sat next to Xiao Huan. Li Yi only glanced at them casually. He had just turned his head when he turned back. His expression was slightly dazed. Sitting next to Xiao Huan was a man about 40 years old. His appearance was not unfamiliar to Li Yi. Professor Feng, as Magistrate Dong's god-level lackey. Usually, wherever he was, Magistrate Dong would appear unless something unexpected happened. Li Yi looked over and saw the magistrate sitting next to him. He felt strange. Did the magistrate and the prefectural school professor have nothing to do all day? This was not a place high officials and nobles would come. One of them was in charge of the affairs of the prefecture, and the other was in charge of education. Logically speaking, they should be very busy. Why did they have the time to come here to watch a show? Clearly, Professor Feng also saw Li Yi. After a pause, he turned his head and whispered a few words in Magistrate Dong's ear. Magistrate Dong had a deep impression of Li Yi. His few poems had surpassed all the students in Qing and Fu. He had a close relationship with Crown Prince Ning and Princess Yongla. However, his personality was a bit strange. He was extremely talented but didn't want to be an official. It was said that he had been made a county officer by the emperor, but he almost never went to the county yamen. The strange thing was, the security of the prefectural city was better than before. In all honesty, Magistrate Dong admired Li Yi very much. Especially that poem, wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, yet saying that the sky is cold in autumn, won him a deep liking. But he clearly had deep connections with the royal family. Although he wanted to promote him, it was not appropriate for him to do so. She had already forgotten about him, but she didn't expect to bump into him here today. Magistrate Dong shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. Today, he just wanted to see the famous painted skin. He turned his head and said to another man in embroidered robes, "I'm curious what's so special about this painted skin that Brother Yen praised it so much." The man in embroidered clothes smiled and said, "I didn't expect that there would be no lack of capable people in this small brothel. Hidden in these short and strange stories is a profound truth. Under Brother Dong's rule, there are indeed many capable people. Before I left, His Majesty had already decided to implement the disciple rules in our Jing Kingdom as a book for children to learn. Brother Dong's contribution to the education of our Jing Kingdom cannot go unnoticed." Accepting the compliment of the man in embroidered clothes calmly, Magistrate Dong couldn't help but turn his head and look at the young man 2 seats away from him. Li Yi didn't want to flirt with a man, not to mention the other was the magistrate, even if it was the emperor. He didn't even think about immediately going up to greet the magistrate. These important people like to go out incognito. If he put on an appearance of greeting a superior, the magistrate might even blame him for ruining his low profile. Wan Ruoqing ran the brothel very well. There was no other brothel in the city that was cleaner, tidier, and more orderly than this one. Every performance would be slightly improved. The performers relied on their acting skills, not their bodies. They were completely incomparable to those coquettish prostitutes outside. If this place couldn't keep customers, where else could? Inspired by himself, Oldman's son was ready to open a special martial arts show, but he was still in the stage of collecting information. After the incident with the Wuxia swordplay, Oldman's son keenly discovered the business opportunity. In the brothel outside the city, such stories seemed to be more popular. Moreover, the martial arts people were generous and would never be short of money. Sometimes, they would even throw large silver ingots on the stage. Oldman's son had to seize this opportunity. Li gave him a good suggestion. He could collect some strange stories in the martial arts world and ask around. Using the information he collected, he could rank the martial arts masters and revise the rankings according to the latest information. He heard that there was a man named Officer Zhao in Chuzhou City. Although he had always been known for his loyalty, he was actually a rare martial arts master. It was said that he was about to step into the Grandmaster realm. Ordinary people didn't even know this secret. Li Yi didn't pay attention to the performance on the stage. He was lost in his thoughts. If such a theater could be opened all over the Jing Kingdom, it would be a powerful force. Moreover, such a force would not easily attract the attention of others. If he could live such a peaceful life, he would consider it as contributing to the entertainment industry of this world. If there were always people who wanted to step on him, he was afraid that their feet would be pierced by nails. Stupid people, they think of ghosts as beauties. They don't listen to the words of loyalty. They are greedy for beauty. They don't know that a wife who has gone through hardships will gladly swallow the saliva of others. I don't know how many stupid people in the world don't know how to wake up. How sad. When thinking, the most annoying thing was to be interrupted, especially when the man in the brocade robe suddenly stood up and said these words with a laugh. To be able to see such emotions from watching a play, this fellow must have been educated before, and he must have been tormented by the path of sages. Even Li Yi was not satisfied, let alone the other people in the theater. Just when they were enjoying the show, someone suddenly stood up and shouted. Especially when the guy was sitting in the front row, everyone's view was blocked. "What are you shouting for? Hurry up and sit down." They were all commoners. How could they know that the person sitting next to the man was the prefectural magistrate? They only knew that this guy had disturbed their interest in watching the show. Perhaps some people were frightened by his sudden shout, so they all spoke up in dissatisfaction. Magistrate Dong smiled bitterly. After so many years, his good friend still hadn't changed his bad habit. Thump. Among the noise, there was a dull sound that was especially clear. A young man who looked like a scholar, who was sitting behind the man in the brocade robe, knelt in front of the man in the brocade robe. After bowing respectfully, he stood up and said, "Thank you for your teachings, sir. My poor wife who has gone through hardships with me for more than 10 years has suffered. Now, for the sake of a fox outside, I actually want to divorce her. How am I different from Wang Sheng?" Sir's words just now were like thunder in my ears. They were deafening. I will remember them for the rest of my life and never dare to forget them. After the scholarly young man finished speaking, he once again bowed to the man in the brocade robe and strode away without looking back. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man's back as he walked away. He was very confused.
Where did they find this actor? It's not too late to mend one's ways. The man in the brocade robe also watched the young man leave with a smile on his face. He stroked his beard, displaying the demeanor of an expert. I'm talking to you, sit down. If it wasn't for a shoe flying from behind and accurately hitting his face, he might have been able to maintain the demeanor of an expert for a while longer. Chapter 269. Magistrate Dong was shocked to see a large shoe print appear on the face of his good friend from the capital. Official Yen. Professor Feng's little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. How dare they throw a shoe at an official from the capital? These unruly people were simply too lawless. How dare you? Who threw the shoe? A few people around the man in embroidered robes had already stood up and turned to glare at the crowd. What did he say? Is he in the right to disturb the show? Chase them out. The guards of the man in embroidered robes were angry, but the audience was even angrier. It was already kind of them not to be thrown out for making a racket in the theater, but they dared to yell at everyone. They couldn't even watch the show. Weren't the few copper coins spent in vain? In the next moment, the guards were drowned in shoes flying from behind. People had thrown out quite a few people like this who didn't know what was good for them. Every show, there would be one or two unlucky ones. This had even become a tradition in the theater. The smelly shoes flew through the air. Magistrate Dong and the other two were also affected. Of course, they couldn't stay here any longer. They ran outside pathetically and finally let out a sigh of relief. A group of unruly people. This is too much. Professor Feng's face was hit by the sole of a shoe. His face was red and he stomped his feet outside. The man in embroidered robes used his sleeve to wipe his face. He wasn't angry. He shook his head and said, "This is a quiet place to watch the show. It is our fault for making a racket and disturbing others. It is not wrong of us to be thrown out." He turned his head to look at Magistrate Dong and said with a smile, "Under Brother Dong's rule, the people are very tough." Compared to the sorry state of Professor Feng and the man in embroidered robes, Professor Dong looked much better. The shoe had not been thrown on him and his clothes were very clean. He patted his robes and said, "The one who made a racket was you. Of course it is not wrong of you to be thrown out. We are the ones who have suffered an undeserved disaster." No matter, no matter. The man in embroidered robes waved his hand and said, "My words just now have caused Brother Dong's students to repent. Brother Dong, shouldn't you treat me to a banquet to express your gratitude?" "All right, Professor Feng. Where is the best restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture? With my meager salary, I can't afford to go to the Drunken Fragrance restaurant." Magistrate Dong smiled and said, "There is a cup of green tea. It is a bit shabby, but it is enough to serve guests. I haven't seen you for a few years, but your stinginess hasn't changed at all, Dong Wenyun." The man in embroidered robes shook his head and sighed. When Li Yi walked out, Magistrate Dong and the others were still standing outside. Xiao Huan wanted to watch the next scene of a Chinese ghost story. Within 20 years, it's not impossible for you to be in the imperial court. Professor Feng's spittle flew everywhere as he spoke. It was as if his blood was about to boil. Cough, thank you, Professor Feng. It's just that I've yet to recover from my injuries. Let's talk about this another time. Li Yi said awkwardly as he covered his chest and coughed a few times. What do you mean we'll talk about it in the future? Young man, how can you be so ignorant? Professor Feng frowned and reprimanded him again. We are scholars, and it is our duty to serve the country. Li Yi rubbed his slightly swollen head. This old man, here he comes again. Chapter 271. Since you are favored by the princess, you should be diligent in the future. Don't say that you don't want to be an official anymore. I really hope to see the day when you and I become officials in the same court. Magistrate Dong said a few words of encouragement and then left with Professor Feng. It was obvious that he saw Li Yi as a junior with a bright future. Professor Feng said a few words. When he left, he still felt that although this seedling had changed, the change was not complete and there was still a lot of room for improvement. If he could become a top official in the future, he could also boast to his old friends that he was the one who made the minister or the prime minister realize their mistakes and work hard to get to where they are today. Li Yi put away the name card. He didn't want to go to the capital to visit Lord Yen.
However, according to Professor Feng, this piece of paper seemed to be worth a penny. He just didn't know how much it could be sold for, but it would definitely be worth 100 taels. After closing the door, he saw Xiaofan coming out of the tile-roofed house with red eyes. He thought that someone bullied her. Before he had time to ask her, the little servant girl took the initiative to say that she was touched by the love between Ning Kaichen and Ye Xiaoqian. The little girl's body was not yet mature, but she was very emotional. When she heard the story for the first time, she cried. She must have cried a lot just now. She was a little depressed at first, but after Li Yi bought her a sugar figurine, she held it in her hand and couldn't bear to eat it. She just looked at it. Li Yi bit off the head of the sugar figurine, and the rest was easily eaten by Xiao Huan. Li Yi wandered on the streets of the prefecture with the little servant girl. At the same time, the princess and her people, who were travel-worn, finally arrived at the capital after a few days of travel. There were already imperial guards waiting outside the city. They cleared the way, leaving a trail of dust behind them to the palace. Is this the celestial punishment that Mingzu mentioned in the letter? In the main hall, Emperor Jing put his hands behind his back and looked at a few fist-sized black clay jars on the table. He couldn't hide the doubt on his face. Yes, father. Don't look down on these small jars. Although they are small, they have the power to destroy the world. After many days of travel, Mingzu couldn't hide the exhaustion on her face. But the matter of celestial punishment was too important. After entering the palace, she didn't take any rest and put it on her father's desk as quickly as possible. Emperor Jing still had some doubt on his face. How could the power of celestial punishment be in the hands of a human? Even he, as the emperor, didn't have this qualification. Changde, who had been accompanying Emperor Jing, also had a trace of suspicion on his old face.
Chapter 272.
Seeing the palace wall turn into rubble in front of him, Changde finally realized the true power of the heavenly punishment. His tattered clothes were instantly drenched in sweat. No one had thought that the power of the heavenly punishment would be so terrifying. The princess was not exaggerating at all. Destroying the world. This was really destroying the world. Just now, he even felt the ground under his feet shake. When he thought that he wanted to experiment in the palace, cold sweat appeared on his forehead again. If he really did that just now, the palace would definitely be destroyed. Even if something happened to His Majesty, it would not be enough for him, Changde, to die 10,000 times. For a moment, Changde's heart was filled with deep gratitude towards the princess. At this time, dozens of armored guards had surrounded the place. Several eunuchs dressed in grey appeared beside Jing Emperor and looked around vigilantly. Jing Emperor panted for a while and his breathing gradually stabilized. His face was still a little flushed. He waved his hand to shake off the guards who were supporting him and drove away the imperial doctor who was panting as he ran over. He strode towards the direction of the collapsed palace wall. Looking at the grey and black ground and rubble, Jing Emperor was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he laughed out loud. Ha ha, what a heavenly punishment! What a heavenly punishment! With this divine object, it is enough to protect the stability of our Jing kingdom for decades. A small black clay pot had such power that even the sturdy palace wall could not withstand the power of the heavenly punishment. It could be imagined that if a few dozen or even dozens of them attacked at the same time, it could really be said to be destroying the world. Under the power of the heavenly punishment, even the sturdy city wall would be easily destroyed like tofu. The Jing kingdom had been weak for a long time and there were strong enemies eyeing it. In these years, he had worked hard to manage a big country to the current situation it was in. It was not easy to find a moment of stability, but the torture of illness had become more and more serious. When he followed the late emperor, it would be the time when the stability and peace of the Jing kingdom would be disrupted. Because of this, he often could not eat or sleep in peace. However, the appearance of such a national treasure was like a ray of light in the darkness, making him seem to see infinite hope. With the Jing country's current national strength, they didn't need to expand their territory or expand their territory. But with this object as a deterrent, it was likely that no one would dare to have any ideas about the Jing country. This old servant congratulates His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Changde had served Emperor Jing for decades. How could he not know what he was thinking? A smile also appeared on his wrinkled face.
Chapter 273.
According to the customs of the royal family, after a princess came of age, she could no longer stay in the palace. Although she didn't have to go to a fief, she still had to build her own residence outside the palace. Princesses who lived in the palace were either underage or very favored. Princesses like Princess Yongla, who had passed the age of 15 but still had their own residence in the palace and didn't have to leave the palace, were few and far between. Many imperial censors submitted memorials about this, but they were all suppressed by the emperor. This showed how much he liked Princess Yongla. Of course, Princess Yongla was the daughter of the empress, the only daughter of the emperor and the empress. It was very normal for her to have such preferential treatment. Emingzu walked out of the hall, and the old woman waiting outside followed behind her. They walked towards a palace in the rear palace. Emingzu said as they walked, "Imperial father wants to send 50 craftsmen to the battlefield. Let Shen Liang go with them. Half of the people in the princess residence who participated in making Tianfa will go with them as well. Tianfa is too dangerous, they have to be careful at all times." Without experiencing it for themselves, they didn't know how dangerous Tianfa was. Even if they knew the recipe, it would be a disaster if they weren't careful. The people of the princess residence had memorized all the rules and regulations that Li Yi had laid out for her. With them following her, it would be much safer. "Don't worry, princess. I will arrange it immediately when I return," the old woman responded. Then, a trace of hesitation appeared on her face. She whispered a few more words in her ear. "What? Imperial father already knows?" She stopped and her expression changed. The old woman nodded and said, "His Majesty's personal palace maids all know about this. It's not a secret. Let him see me immediately." Mingzhu's expression darkened. "Nanny, why is the princess looking for me?" In the princess residence, a young man followed the old woman and asked in confusion. Naturally, this old woman doesn't know about the princess. The old woman said faintly and pointed to the back garden of the princess residence. "The princess is there. Go there yourself." The man saw a figure in the garden and suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He strode over. "Princess," he said respectfully and stood at the back, waiting quietly. Emingzu turned her head and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face as she said, "Guard Lu, you've been working in the princess residence for quite some time, right?" "Princess, I am indebted to the princess for her promotion. I have been in the princess residence for 5 years." The young man said slowly, "From tomorrow onwards, you will be Shen Liang's personal bodyguard. Tian Fa's matter is of great importance." Chapter 275. Lu Rui raised her head and glanced at the girl. She continued to sweep the yard. She had heard about the Wulin hero ranking and was unhappy that her name was not on it. If her sister had not stopped her, she would have gone to look for trouble with the second master on the heaven list. She had completely mastered the essence of Tai Chi sword. After her swordsmanship improved, she faced a new bottleneck. This time, it would not be easy to break through. A goal that was too far away would always make people lose motivation. She did not practice much these days. According to Li Yi's story, sweeping was also a form of cultivation, so she decided to try her best. However, although her swordsmanship did not improve, she was much calmer. When she was free, she would sweep the yard with a broom. The yard was cleaner than ever. "Excuse me," she said without looking up when she swept the girl's feet. "According to the rules of Jianghu, if you don't accept my challenge, the first place on the heaven list will be mine." The girl was not angry when she was ignored. She did not realize that she had recognized the wrong person. She only knew that the girl in front of her was not simple. The first place on the heaven list was a girl. Did that mean that she was the most powerful girl in the Jing Kingdom, apart from the Grandmasters? Fong crossed his arms and looked like he was watching a show. This girl was really brave to challenge the elder Mississippi. He did not expect that she would mistake the second miss for the elder Mississippi. He did not know if she was lucky or unlucky. In terms of martial arts, the elder miss was definitely more powerful. However, the elder miss was kind and knew when to stop. As for the second miss, she never showed mercy when she fought. "I didn't expect the first place on the heaven list to have such little courage." The girl pouted and turned to leave.
I will tell them that Lu Rui is just a... She does not even have the courage to accept a challenge. How can she be the first? As soon as the words left her mouth, her expression suddenly changed. She whipped her head around, only to find a fair hand resting on her slender neck. Even if she was a martial arts master, the neck was her weakest part. If the hand exerted a little force, her neck would be broken. This is a sneak attack. She glared at him and said, unconvinced. Lu Rui held the broom in one hand and let go of her neck with the other. He made a please gesture. She could ignore this young girl's challenge, but she would not allow her to tarnish her sister's reputation. The girl stood in front of her with a sword in her hand and asked, "You don't need a weapon?" Lu Rui was too lazy to respond. Her opponent was this little girl, and she did not even have the interest to draw her sword. Be careful. To a true expert, having or not having a weapon didn't make much of a difference. Was it the distortion of human nature or the degeneration of morality behind this incident? Welcome to Old Sun's commentary on Jianghu. I'll see you there tomorrow. Ancient people who had not been poisoned by the circle of friends would not be able to resist such a title. The more righteous a person was, the more they cared about their reputation. Heroes used their martial arts to break the law. Most of the evil deeds were done by people with high martial skills. As the lieutenant of a county, Li Yi had to do something to maintain the peace and order of the area under his jurisdiction. Of course, this method would not work on the infamous bandits in Jianghu, who did not care about their reputation. Instead, it would spread their bad reputation even further and increase their arrogance. At this time, it was necessary to bring some positive energy to the murky Wulin. Master Zhang, who was ranked 36th on the chivalrous leaderboard, broke into a bandit's lair alone and killed more than 10 bandits with his own hands. He got rid of a big scourge in Jianghu. According to the latest strength assessment, Master Zhang's ranking rose by 2 places and became 34th on the heavenly leaderboard. The Qingzhou caravan was kidnapped by bandits. Master Chen and Master Li saw injustice and wiped out the bandits. However, they were seriously injured and almost lost their lives. This kind of selfless and fearless spirit was worth learning by everyone. Master Chen and Master Li were named as the stars of Jianghu because of this. They were one of the top 10 figures in Jianghu. The leader of the caravan rewarded them with a lot of gold for saving their lives. The magistrate of Anxi County, Lord Lu, personally came to visit. Positive news like this could be publicized more. Of course, this was a very complicated and tedious job. Old Sun and the others were still in the exploration stage. Li Yi gave them sufficient funds. Seeing how important this matter was to Li Yi, Old Sun had already assigned many people to take care of this matter. Old Sun had a very big dream. He wanted to revitalize this industry so that more and more actors and actresses could eat their fill. This dream could not be realized by himself. Li Yi had now become his hope to realize this dream. One day, their brothels would be built in other prefectures, or even the capital, or even the entire Jing kingdom. Every time he thought about this, Old Sun's old face would glow. The ranking of the chivalrous leaderboard was updated very quickly. Yesterday, Chuzhou's Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 40th, had 3 of his ribs broken by Qingzhou's Pound, who was ranked 41st. The next day, their rankings were switched. Those who were ranked at the bottom of the chivalrous leaderboard or those who were not on the leaderboard seemed to have found a breakthrough. They all expressed their desire to challenge Zhao Yuanwei. In view of his injuries, in the spirit of humanitarianism, everyone was willing to give him half a month to recuperate. It was said that in order to decide who would be the first to challenge, a few heroes fought. The scene was very intense. Some of them were even more seriously injured than Zhao Yuanwei. After that, the Zhao family's old house in Chuzhou became empty. More than half of the Zhao family's property was sold. Only a small portion was left for the old servants to take care of. As for Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 41st on the heavenly leaderboard, no one knew where he went. Wu Er was the one who told Li Yi these things. Wu Er had now become Old Sun's martial arts consultant. He received a monthly salary of 500 copper coins. All he needed to do was to ask his friends in the martial arts community to pay attention to the big and small matters in the martial arts community. The more valuable the information he provided, the more rewards he would receive. After Old Sun's team organized the information and told it to the people in the martial arts community,
They received a large sum of money. A small portion of the money was used to put up rewards. It seemed that he had underestimated old Sunday. With his efforts, this great cause was becoming more and more prosperous. Almost all the poor actors in Anxi County had been integrated by him. Spacious brothels were also spreading to further places. Due to the declining business of Ruidu and hard liquor, the family's income, which had been decreasing every day, increased again. Even Li Yi had to admit that he had underestimated the huge potential of the brothels. After lying in the courtyard for a short while, Xiaofan had already come to complain twice. The target of her complaint was, of course, the girl named Yang Liuqing, who was still begging Rui to take her as a disciple. The girl was young, but she was very persistent. Since Rui did not agree, she would come every day before dawn to clean the courtyard, boil water, and chop firewood. After she was done with these chores, she would take a rag and wipe every place in the house until it was spotless. Most of these chores were done by Xiaofan, but they were all snatched away by her. The servant girl had never been so free in her life. He had told her several times not to come anymore, but she never listened. She did not say a word and only knew how to work hard. Even Li Yi was a little touched by her. "Young master, say something about her. She does all the chores, and Xiaofan has nothing to do." The servant girl looked at the girl who started to clean the courtyard with a broom in dissatisfaction, and said while hugging Li Yi's arm, "Isn't it good to have nothing to do?" Li Yi knocked her head lightly and said, "Go play with Sister Sue and the others. Let her do these chores if she wants to." Before Xiaofan left, Li Xian walked in from outside and pointed at the unfamiliar girl in the courtyard suspiciously. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Who is she? Is she your new concubine?" Clang! With the sound of a long sword being unsheathed, a sword light slashed over. Chapter 277. Retribution for having a foul mouth always came very fast. The girl named Yang Liuqing had the temperament of a Jianghu person. If there was a disagreement, she would raise her sword. There was a reason why she chose Lu Rui as her master. Of course, she wouldn't kill him. The sword was more of a threat. Li Xian's guards didn't care whether she was threatening or really wanted to harm the crown prince. Anyone who dared to use weapons against the crown prince would be treated as an assassin. The two guards shouted. A flash of sword light flashed and collided with Yang Liuqing's sword. There was a sound of metal colliding. The girl couldn't help but take a few steps back. Li Xian's guards were all experts who were picked out of 100 or 1,000. Their strength was obviously better than Yang Liuqing's. Li Yi didn't have a clear understanding of the girl's strength. He only saw her fight with Rui. She was captured alive before she could even make one move. However, this didn't mean that she was weak. Mississippi Lu couldn't be used as a reference. Li Yi was very sure that even Li Xian's guards couldn't last one move against her. After forcing the girl to retreat, the two guards obviously didn't want to let her go. They took the opportunity to press on, as if they wanted to capture her alive. There was a sound of weapons clashing in the courtyard. Yang Liuqing had a hard time dealing with one of them. Now that there were two of them, she could only retreat. Soon, she was about to retreat into the house. Li Yi was just about to tell Li Xian to let his guards know when to stop. He couldn't blame anyone else for the sins of his mouth. Before he could say anything, the two guards' swords were broken into two. One of them had a sword on his neck. The other was shocked. When he was about to explode, the girl glanced at him coldly. It was like a bucket of cold water was poured on his head. He stood there and didn't dare to move. "If you want to fight, go outside. Don't dirty the courtyard," Lu Rui said coldly and entered the house. The two guards didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat off their foreheads. They picked up the broken weapons on the ground and immediately retreated. They didn't dare to cause trouble for the girl anymore. Just now, he didn't manage to see it clearly. He only felt a flash of light before the saber in his hand broke. Then, a saber was placed on his neck. He had always known that this woman was not simple, but today, he deeply understood how terrifying she was. If she was on the Wulin hero ranking, she would at least be in the top 5. Yang Liuqing watched as the two people who had forced him to the point where he couldn't even fight back fled like stray dogs with their tails between their legs in the blink of an eye. The determination in his eyes deepened as he watched the figure walk into the house. The two guards were chased outside by Li Xian. They lay down on Li Yi's rocking chair comfortably.
Chapter 278.
I heard that there is a new play in the brothel outside the city. It's called A Chinese Ghost Story. It's better than The Painted Skin. Do you want to watch it together?
Haha, I've seen it a long time ago. The theater in the city opened 2 days ago. It's a little slower outside the city. This time, I came to listen to old Zhao talk about Wulin.
At the entrance of a tile-roofed house outside the city, 2 men greeted each other with a smile and walked in side by side.
I want to watch A Chinese Ghost Story, but I'm afraid I can't today. I just came from there. The brothel is closed today. I'll come back early tomorrow.
A person who came out of the house reminded them.
It's closed? Why?
What's wrong with those people? They don't want to earn money. People who like to watch plays and listen to songs inside and outside the prefectural city were surprised to find that the recently built brothels were all closed today. Those who wanted to watch new plays and listen to Wulin's stories suddenly had nowhere to go. They could only go back home after cursing for a while. In the city, the well-received Chongping Street Theater also hung up a sign that it was closed today, making countless people leave in disappointment. At this time in the theater, a few managers of the brothels outside the city gathered there, frowning.
Miss Wan, we can't just close like this.
These days, A Chinese Ghost Story is very popular. If we don't open for a day, we will lose 5 strings of coins. A gray-haired old man said with a sad face. As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone's eyes were on the only woman present. On the surface, it was old Sun who was in charge, but they all knew that Miss Wan was actually the one who had the most say when it came to big things. Before Wan Ruoqing could say anything, another old man slammed the table. His beard trembled as he said, "These despicable ****stards. It's not easy for the children to have enough to eat, and now they're plotting against us.
We can't hand over the script. It's more important than our lives.
They want to buy it just because they have money.
This is robbery. Anyway, I don't have many years to live. Even if I have to risk my old life, I will splash their blood."
Wan Ruoqing hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Mr. Qian. No one wants to hand over the script. No one wants to give it to them. Mr. Sun is going to solve this problem. He will not let those people succeed."
Wan Ruoqing said,
"It's difficult." The old man who spoke first sighed and said, "We have no power or influence. What can we use to fight against them? Those children are still lying inside." As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone saw Old Man Sun accompanying a young man walking over from the back door.
"How's the injured?"
The young man walked over and asked directly. Everyone looked at the young man with a hint of doubt in their eyes.